Simple earth burial. The most widespread burial practice in human history, this method involves placing the body of the deceased into a pit dug into the ground and covering it with soil. Evidence of intentional earth burial goes back at least 100,000 years, found in sites across Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. What makes it significant is not just its age, but the fact that it appears independently in cultures that had no contact with one another, suggesting something deeply instinctive about returning the dead to the earth. Bodies were sometimes placed on their backs, sometimes curled into a fetal position, and the differences in posture often carried spiritual meaning tied to beliefs about the afterlife or rebirth. Cremation. Some ancient peoples chose fire over earth, burning the body until only ash and small bone fragments remained. The practice is ancient, with evidence dating back roughly 20,000 years in parts of Australia, making it one of the oldest known funerary rituals in the world. Cremation was widely adopted in ancient Greece and Rome, where it was seen as a swift and honorable way to release the soul from the body. The ashes were typically gathered and placed in urns, which were then buried, kept in tombs, or stored in the homes of the living. Different cultures assigned very different meanings to the act, but across most of them, fire was seen as a powerful force of transformation rather than destruction. Megalithic tomb burial. Thousands of years ago, people across Europe began constructing massive stone chambers to house their dead, dragging enormous rocks into deliberate arrangements and covering them with earth or leaving them exposed. These structures, known broadly as megalithic tombs, include dolmens, passage tombs, and chamber tombs, and they were built without metal tools or wheeled vehicles. Sites like Newgrange in Ireland and the dolmens of the Korean peninsula showed just how widespread this approach was. The tombs were rarely meant for a single person. They functioned more like communal vaults, used repeatedly over centuries, suggesting that the dead were kept close to the community rather than separated from it. Sky burial. In Tibet and parts of Central Asia, the body was carried to an exposed hilltop or flat rock and left for vultures and other scavenging birds to consume. Far from being seen as disrespectful, this was considered a sacred act rooted in Buddhist belief. The body, once the spirit had left it, was viewed as an empty vessel, and allowing it to feed other living creatures was understood as a final act of generosity. Specialists called Rugyapas performed the ritual, which involved careful preparation of the body before it was offered to the birds. The practice continues in some regions today, and in high-altitude areas where the ground is too frozen or rocky for digging, it remains one of the most practical options as well. Tree burial. Certain cultures, particularly among indigenous peoples of North America and parts of Australia, placed their dead in the branches of trees or on raised wooden platforms rather than in the ground. The body was wrapped in animal hides or woven material and secured above the earth, where it was left to decompose naturally under the open sky. The Sioux and other plains tribes of North America practiced this widely, seeing elevation as a way of bringing the deceased closer to the spiritual world above. After a period of time, the bones were sometimes gathered and given a secondary burial in the ground, meaning tree burial was often the first stage of a longer process rather than the final one. Cave burial. Long before people built tombs or mounds, they were placing their dead in the natural chambers and crevices of caves. Some of the oldest confirmed burials on record were found in caves, including the remains of Neanderthals in sites across Europe and the Middle East, which suggests that even our closest evolutionary relatives felt the need to mark death in some deliberate way. Caves offered natural protection from scavengers and the elements, but for many cultures they also held spiritual significance, seen as entrances to an underworld or a place between the living and the dead. In some cases, bodies were carried deep into cave systems, far beyond where daylight reached, indicating that the journey inward was itself part of the ritual. Mummification. Rather than allowing the body to decompose, some cultures went to great lengths to preserve it, treating the flesh with salts, resins, and wrappings to halt decay and keep the physical form intact. Ancient Egypt is the most well-known example, where the process was deeply tied to beliefs about the soul needing its body in the afterlife. The practice involved removing internal organs, drying the body with natron, and wrapping it in linen over the course of several weeks. But Egypt was far from alone. Naturally mummified remains have been found in the Atacama Desert in South America, in the bogs of northern Europe, and in the permafrost of Siberia, showing that preservation of the dead arose in many places, sometimes intentionally and sometimes through the conditions of the environment itself. Secondary burial. In a number of ancient cultures, burial was not a single event, but a two-stage process. The body was first laid somewhere to decompose, whether in a temporary grave, on a platform, or in a charnel house, and then, after the flesh was gone, the bones were collected, cleaned, and given a final burial elsewhere. This second burial was often a much larger ceremony than the first, treated as the true moment of passage into the world of the dead. The practice appears in ancient Southeast Asia, among various indigenous American groups, and in prehistoric Europe. The gathering of the bones was sometimes done by family members, making it an intimate ritual that kept the living actively involved in the passage of the dead. Bog burial. Across the peat bogs of northern Europe, the bodies of hundreds of ancient people have been found preserved in extraordinary condition, their skin darkened and leathered by the acidic water, but their features still recognizable thousands of years later. Most of these individuals, including well-known finds like Tolland Man from Denmark, appear to have been deliberately placed in the bog, rather than dying there accidentally. Many show signs of violent death, leading researchers to believe they were sacrificed or executed, and the bog itself may have been chosen for its association with the boundary between the human world and something beyond it. Whether these were offerings, punishments, or something else entirely is still debated, but the consistency of the practice across different regions suggests it carried a shared and deliberate meaning. Ossuary burial. After bodies had fully decomposed, many cultures removed the bones and placed them into small stone boxes, ceramic containers, or dedicated communal chambers called ossuaries. This approach allowed a community to maintain a physical connection to many generations of ancestors without requiring vast amounts of burial space. Jewish communities in ancient Israel used carved stone ossuaries extensively during the late Second Temple period, and similar practices appear in ancient Greece, France, and parts of Asia. The bones were often arranged with care, and in some communal ossuaries, the skulls were separated and stacked distinctly from the rest of the skeleton, suggesting that particular parts of the body held specific spiritual importance even after death. Tumulus burial. A tumulus is a burial mound built specifically over a single grave rather than serving as a communal site, and they appear across an enormous range of cultures from Bronze Age Europe to ancient China and beyond. The mound was raised directly above the burial pit, sealing it beneath a permanent earthen monument that marked the spot for anyone passing through the landscape. In many warrior cultures, the size of the tumulus was directly tied to the fame and power of the person beneath it, and constructing one required the coordinated effort of an entire community. Some tumuli were decorated with stones, wooden posts, or carved markers, and a few were designed so that sunlight entered the burial chamber on specific days of the year, suggesting a connection between the dead and the movement of the sun. Grave goods burial. Across virtually every ancient culture that practiced burial, the dead were rarely placed in the ground alone. Objects were laid alongside them, ranging from simple tools and food to elaborate jewelry, weapons, and ceremonial items, reflecting beliefs that the deceased would need or want these things in whatever existence came next. The specific goods chosen reveal a great deal about how a society understood death and the afterlife. In ancient Egypt, the wealthy were buried with furniture, cosmetics, and shabtis, small figurines meant to carry out labor in the next world. Viking burials sometimes included entire ships packed with supplies and servants. Even in simple prehistoric graves, a single polished stone or handful of ochre placed beside the body tells us that the living were thinking carefully about where the dead were going.